everyone. Hope you guys had a lovely tea. So we'll now begin our last round of talks by Professor Xu and Professor Wang. So Professor Xu, please.
Thank you for coming. I understand this is not a typical academic talk, it's rather sort of for the purpose to kind of solicit any kind of collaborative opportunities. So what I end up doing is to sort of give you in broad strokes, my first what kind of training background I have, and then because most of my work is single authors, I kind of mentioned a little bit about that, and then the most important part is kind of to tell you some of the two kind of two collaborative projects I'm doing now, and in a way that helps me to understand how I do the collaboration with other colleagues. Then I will wrap up with potential areas of collaboration. So I got my PhD from Yale in sociology, and my background is more like comparative historical sociology, sort of looking at these revolutions, rise of capitalism, nation state. That's kind of a big question, and particularly interesting what people call contention politics, movements, states, power politics, that kind of big stuff. And I'm also kind of influenced by what commonly people would say cultural turn in humanity and social science, that taking culture and meaning more seriously in historical explanation. So that's kind of my background. And my work has been, mostly qualitative, that involves, going to archives and reading archival materials, published sources. There's some interviews of people who are involved in the historical process that I study. I have start doing some quantitative work through collaboration, although I had didn't really do that until this point. I was kind of typical, I guess, Asian student. When I went to the grad school, I had a science major. I was actually a chemistry major in college, so I have strong background in math, but in grad school that was not my interest. So I always got this A+ in statistics, but never bothered to use it again. So this is really only recent kind of month that I guess last year I can start doing quantitative stuff. So the single author work that I've done have just some examples that the first one I want to mention is the organizational kind of emergence of the Communist Party in China. So I look at basically the organizational landscape of the May 4th movement and try to explain why, among those these youth organizations, why some of them turned to communists and what others sort of didn't go that way. So I gave this kind of basically explanation that I argue that the conditions, even though they all call themselves steady-state societies, but the way how they organize internally and how to sort of discuss the kind of organizational culture will differ quite much between those who, the joiners versus the non-joiners. And we'll argue that the joiners actually tend to be very kind of hybrid organizational identities, combining traditional sort of Chinese intellectual organization with modern kind of religious practice and stuff like that, which actually make them more prone to communist sort of take over. So that was published in the American Sociological Review, and has the second sort of work that I would mention is sort of this study of how the elite politics and mass mobilization interact during the Cultural Revolution, because I think this is something that's been quite neglect in the literature. Or what you see in the literature on the Cultural Revolution is that either it's about this kind of growing conflict among the political elites, which leads to one fraction of the elites reaching out to the masses, and that's how it would happen. Or the other main body would be looking at why giving why students or the masses join sort of rival factions, what kind of rational decision they were making when they joined these factions. So what I argue is that we have to take the political process of the Cultural Revolution more seriously by looking at the interaction between these two, and how the nature of the Cultural Revolution actually evolved over time. The third one is a paper that's being sort of on with the Journal of Asian Studies, where I look at sort of using, or what I argue is that there's very little understanding of political cooptation. So other people assume that it's just like carrot-stick problem, or that organizations are being co-opted because they rely sort of they have resource reliance, or they were being coerced by the party or the organization which co-opted them, or that there's certain ideological affinity, or there is certain kind of deception involved in that co-optation process. But I argue, using the example of the Chinese Communist co-optation of the YMCA, is that there's a lot to do with the styles of civic action, and how these, how the organization, civic organization, sort of coordinate a manner between themselves that create conditions for cooptation. And the last one, before I move on to collaboration, is a study of sort of the communist, in the period when the Chinese communists developed very rapidly in the Chinese countryside, what kind of connection that the sort of the growth on the ground and the changing political organizational culture within the party, and I argue sort of using this Hirschman's idea and exit voice dynamics to kind of expand that. It's something that's still kind of in the making, this work. Now I want to move on to the collaboration that I'm doing now. So the first one is a quantitative project with some economics colleagues, and we have a Daniel analysis. I'm just writing a paper basically. And the second one is a qualitative, more kind of theoretical project. The quantitative, so I'll instead of walking through the major content of that, the project, so I just tell you, how did I get involved in that, and the way how we approach the project, right? So the project was started by Professor Ivan Pong's team, right? They kind of start. This is question the agrarian causes of the Chinese Communist Revolution. It's a very classical question, why the communists win over the nationalists and took over the state power, right? And it's being a subject of debate for more than half of a decade, half of a century. And so Professor Ivan Pong's team sort of amassed a lot of data basically from the county gazetteers, and they did they test each kind of propositions that are being advanced by currently the existing literature, whether it's about, let's say, the impact of Japanese aggression, or the effectiveness of communist mobilization, or the attractiveness of their social economic policy, or some sort of ecological conditions. These are, there's a variety of propositions that have been advanced. So they test each hypothesis. The result was very mixed. So I was initially kind of approached to give some comments. So what I suggest was that this is there's already a comparative sociological kind of literature, huge literature on the causes of the agrarian causes of the revolution. Reaching all the way back to Tocqueville. In mid-century, you have Barron Moore, Theodore Scottbull, and more recently, also another more recent literature. So I said, we will type to that literature and see if we can sort of test some new idea on that. And what I sort of initially, so I sort of started having this idea, we should try the state centralization as a really important mechanism. which is not being really well addressed in the literature on the Chinese Communist Revolution. That's how, so I was then asked to take over the project to the next stage. This is just a visualization of this communist takeover. So the red one and the yellow one sort of shows the great patterns. That's the initial data they gathered from the candidates. Then when I joined in, I said, we need more data, particularly about state centralization, and we need the administrative records of the KMT, the nationalist government. So I ended up digging this more than 2,000 volumes of these administrative records, going through each of all of them and to find data that could be good indicators of the theory that I want to test, right? And also how to make them commensurable across different provinces, because we are looking at the three provinces in central China, which was the territory, the most contested territory during the revolution. What we did was using this data. So basically, I guess I'm going to move fast. The argument that I want to test was, Tocqueville has this idea already when he wrote about the French Revolution, that state centralization really sort of, the rise of the state building its apparatus in the countryside sort of inadvertently create conditions for revolution. And there's a Chinese sociologist, Xiaohong, who's kind of godfather of Chinese sociology. So there are very similar analysis in the 40s about what's going on at the time. And what he argued was that the state centralization disrupt the balance between state elite and local sort of norms and leads, that balance of power, and that sort of turn the state agents into predatory sort of agents over peasants and create sort of revolutionary condition. And there's other kind of scholars have similarly advanced a similar idea. What we did is to we have decided we need to look at state penetration, and so I did data eventually find local militia being very important indicator of the force of militia force, because this was a major measure by the central state to control, to increase their penetration to local society, and we predict that would increase the tax restriction, because you have now a bunch of kind of state agents who try to tax them a lot more than they did before, partly because for their own interest. And then through some mediator would lead to sort of communist success. And we did that. I was pretty nervous when I finished all this data collection and turned it to the RAs. And what I guess I won't have time to go through the details. But anyway, it turned out the result sort of very satisfactorily conformed our theory, and what we see was that there was this that state centralization increased, sort of worsened this local social fabric that leads to tax extraction, and then create conditions for the communist social economic policy to flourish and lead to their success. So the second, I'll move on to the second collaborative project. So this is also in a way a product of serendipity. So this is Isaac Reed is a sociologist, associate professor of sociology at University of Virginia. So we actually overlapped 1 year in grad school, but we never really kind of get into very deep conversation. Then he was a reviewer for my article when I had this cultural revolution article initiative was reviewed by the American Journal of Sociology. and he was very supportive. He then told me when for a conference one day, we met in a conference, and said he was a reviewer, and he really liked the paper. He said maybe we should do something together, because given the theoretical vein we're pursuing. So, and Isaac being, he was a sort of more like a theory guy. He was one of the winners, well, probably the youngest winner of American Sociological Review Association Theoretical Agenda Award. So because we have really have a lot of theoretical kind of I guess agreement in many ways. So then through this FASS, this visiting fellowship program, I sort of brought him in December, actually, just a month ago, more than a month ago. So we just start, how we do this, right? We kind of just initially, because he has written about the Whiskey Rebellion in the U.S. We said maybe we can do some comparison between Whiskey Rebellion, the Cultural Revolution. That's one case I work on, and the French Revolution, which is a subject we both are very deeply interested in. So that's how we start. But then we arrive. We basically finished the whole paper, a whole paper draft in 7 working days. It's crazy. So initially, we start telling stories without any theoretical kind of, coloring, right? We just tell the stories, Whiskey Rebellion, the Cultural Revolution, and then we kind of try to do the French Revolution. Then we figure out maybe we should use the Cultural Revolution as this sort of paradigmatic case of the kind of theory we want to argue, right? So what we do is that because we both are very unsatisfied with this current theory of power, which tends to, a lot of them go from certain kind of left Weberianism, that power is a certain source of power, whether it's military power, economic power, or ideological power. We will kind of look at more interesting theory of power that's more about, politics on the go, something that's always in making. And we believe that the whole kind of performative term in humanities and a bit of social science is useful for that purpose. So we end up using, this is Shanghai January Storm, 1967, Shanghai Revolution. So we argue that the Cultural Revolution really sort of tells us quite a lot about this power on the go. And we propose this theory, and it's so because during a certain kind of historical transformative event, that there's a breakdown of certain kind of clarities of social situation, and there's a lot of ambiguity in those situations. Who's in charge? And in particularly revolutionary situation, there's a question of revolutionary sovereignty. Who has the right to exercise violence, right? And that's what happened. This is the trouble with the Cultural Revolution. So we argue, we sort of focus on, we add these 2 concepts, hermeneutical ambiguity, because there's already a lot of in the mainstream, theoretical mainstream, in comparative historical sociology. There's one school that's more focused on finding the causes of the certain historical outcome through giving conditions. There are now that focus a lot on contingent happening occurrence in the process, but it's less kind of focused on that emergent structure in those kind of transformative event. So we argued that we have to take hermeneutical kind of cultural aspect of those contingent events seriously, and we argue also this is a concept from performative term, performative felicity. We use 3 kind of waves of violence to show that. Anyway, I guess I'm running out of time. So basically, that shows that the other style of my collaboration is more kind of just sit down, write together, pushing each other to articulate. So anyway, lastly, I just want to say that. My main kind of interest, I think is about these patterns and dynamics of large-scale conflict movement and state building in modern Asia. And I would welcome any kind of opportunity to collaborate in that regard, maybe even beyond those kind of scope. I'm familiar with modern Chinese historical data. That's kind of something that I always do. And if you are interested in discussing that, I'll be happy to do that. And I think I have some strength in setting up a research, to make how to make some research interesting. And theory, that's, I always teach theory. That's something I'm kind of good at that. And even though I'm not a linguistic, I'm actually quite good at writing. That's what I would say. Okay. Thank you.
Any questions?
On your first proposal, I just wondered whether among the agrarian groups that were joining or supporting the Communist Party, to what extent were they influenced by some kind of idealism? Is there something, is that too abstract? In other words, not just livelihood questions, but some ideals, whether it's nation building, nationalism against the Japanese, or some idealism about more like the peasant rebellions of the past, poverty and against the rich and so on.
Yeah.
What degree of idealism was involved?
So, the early scholarship would be, say, peasant nationalism, that's of course ideology, because they were suddenly, these peasants who been sort of imbued in tradition for centuries, and then suddenly the Japanese sort of invasion threw them into national politics, and they start kind of, being patriotic, and that's the source of how the communists tap into this kind of patriotic sentiment, right? That's the early argument. I think that's a little bit, that's definitely that aspect of that sort of ideology that, that's what communists was good at. And what we did in this project was to look at the kind of a larger condition, because we were basically testing this over 200 counties, and we were the varying conditions that lead to their success. And what we argue, and I think we're going to look at more state-society relations. We think that's probably more important. It's really a local elite structure has shifted, right? It's not so about the abstraction of peasantry, but rather those who were the notables in the community, and that structure has shifted over, being impacted in the process by the state, partly by the state centralization process. So what you end up actually seeing is there's a group of sort of oftentimes local young leaders, right, who were actually defending their local rights against a penetrating state, whether that state was pushed by the KMT or the Japanese, right? So these are people who end up going along with the communists, and what we see is this larger kind of pattern behind that, which is you would actually first have this shock on the local government structure and local elite structure before that would happen. Yeah.
May I follow up a little bit by asking whether some of the traditional organizations, whether the young people I was thinking of for idealism, but for the established groups, whether they're based on religious organizations or secret societies, or even gangs and so on, local tough guys and so on. To what extent were they converted to some of the ideals of the Communist Party, or to what extent were they forced to take part all else kind of situation? What were the proportions? Can you work that out, the proportions?
So I will only have some inklings from basically case studies, right? I'm sort of more familiar with, but because it's hard to quantify that aspect, right? Because the local organization, I have thought about, how do we do this, right? In terms of the local sort of social organizations, whether it's temple organization, village organization, or so-called redemption team societies. But it's hard to find data across all these counties simply because there's no data for us to do that. Whereas, so most data that I got, from my side was that there was really in the 1930s the KMT, because they want to reform local government, so that they conduct a lot of research on that. So I got my data basically from those this research that I don't know if anybody has used them at all. I think probably I'm the first guy to have used this, to try to quantify them. But other than that, it's hard to quantify local organizational landscape in a way that will be commensurable across different counties. So that's. But I had a sense that the conversion story is more important. That a lot of them was these local organizations that are being tapped into by the communists. Thank you for the question.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your talk. I'm Andrea from NTU, India. I want to do something on the methodology first and on the practice second. So on the methodology, you are starting from sociology.
Yeah.
You are approaching a human experience, which you call revolution according to historical records. And you are approaching it using some historical methodology, and you are adding something else, it seems, from other disciplines, maybe from political sciences, and the three of them create a methodology, as a new approach. The first question is, how did you select the method for your methodology? How did you pick up something from sociology, something from history, something from political sciences to get into your toolkit? And how do you assess the toolkit? How do you say that this toolkit is useful to get into what you want to do in the theoretical side? In practice, when you say tell the story without any theory, on which ground can you do it?
Okay, that's two very challenging questions. So I guess that for the first one, I would say, so in terms of methods, I guess I'm pretty much a pragmatist. I think whatever that would help to clarify, our empirical understanding, help. But I do think that, working these two, I'm being more used to the kind of qualitative, historical methods. Then once I start, quantitative, I do this thing that very different kind of styles of inquiry. I would say that, my sense is that quantitative sort of data would be able to better able to show some kind of pattern which the pattern in order to be well explained and articulated has to be aided by kind of qualitative or kind of I guess historical, theoretically informed kind of analysis. So that would be, I guess, my tentative answer to your first question. The second question, I think, I guess what I was saying was that that because my course and I, we didn't sort of talk that much before we kind of start this project. So we just thought, we don't want to kind of impose. So it's, of course, every story is theoretically informed. We were just saying that we try to tell the historical narrative in a way that's makes it exciting. It's more like a historian telling, let's say what happened in August 4th in 1979 in France, right, in Paris. So we just tell the historical narratives. Then we kind of think about the ways of what makes that exciting, right? And then we kind of say maybe there's something about power being performative. That's sort of we kind of start picking up, right? So that's wrong way of doing that, I think, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I think we have one last question.
Yes. So, I'm from NTU as well, and I work a lot with contemporary civic organizations in China. So, would you mind say a few more words about your findings of the political cooptation of them?
Okay.
The YMCA is still alive, still in China, so it's still sort of relevant.
Yeah, and they are no longer a autonomous organization, right? So, of course, YMCA, they don't even know that YMCA was a huge deal in China, in the 1920s and 30s. But so, so I propose that, we would always, political cooptation is something that we kind of have a certain understanding, but usually we tend to assume that it's done by an incumbent government because there's certain kind of resource dependence and or coercion involved in that, right? And of course, that doesn't explain the case that I was looking at. Of course, the YMCA didn't depend on the communists to provide them resources, right? They had a lot of money and they were well connected, whether with American or Chinese elites. And I think there's other argument about, whether it's about ideological affinity, although there was some part of that, the social gospel, there were all people who tried to kind of combine social gospel with Marxism, but it doesn't explain, it's just a few of them, right? And there was also, this issue of deception, whether, you being co-opted because you were deceived by these, let's say, the Nazis suddenly, co-opt this workers' organization because they somehow had the wrong idea of the Nazis' intention. I think that often was only partial explanation. So what I proposed was that, we have to look at the way how these organizations internally coordinated. And I think YMCA, to put it very simply, in China at the time, there was sort of a growing kind of different styles of civic action within the YMCA. You have the city association, student association, having a very different, divergent kind of way of doing stuff. And so what happened was that they were splitting up almost, because there was also divergent debate among them. But they were only kept together because there was an interest in for the national committee to keep them together so that they could, because the city organization was being secularized, the student organization was still pretty much Christian dominant. So they want to keep that so that they get more funding from national, because it was pretend to be still a Christian organization, even though the city organization was already very secularized anyway. So there are all kind of reasons why so I use this kind of a theory of loose coupling from organizational theory and say this is an effective solution in the short run, but somehow create more kind of long-term problem for them. And I use a lot of archival documents showing how the communists use basically the student organization as a gateway into the YMCA, but at the same time they were able to draw a lot of resource and benefits from the city associations. And so what you have very striking stories about, these long-term mission, the Christian pastors, who during the Cultural Revolution turned out to be already a long-term communist agent with the YMCA. Anyway, that's a long kind of story. Yeah, but what I argue is that those existing explanations they don't explain because they don't address this organizational coordination problem that I'm more interested in.
It's not my area, so I may be showing complete ignorance, but it did occur to me in your interesting talk, there have been three major political upsets that somehow resonated with what went on in China, although not in a violent revolution, at least yet. One is the Duterte kind of revolution in the Philippines, which must reflect some kind of unhappiness on the part of a lot of people there who depend on rice farming. The second major upset, which is maybe related to this alienation, is the Brexit vote, as well as the Trump election in the United States, where people were upset about taxes and stuff like that. And it kind of sounds a bit similar. The ways of expressing it seem quite different. I'm wondering if your analysis could extend to those kind of modern societies.
Yeah. Well, I think that would be a larger problem. You know, of course, the revolutions, these social revolutions always have some kind of populist sort of tones, right? I think, but I would hesitate to kind of equate. I mean that kind of tapping into populist sentiment was and anti-elite, sentiment, of course, was one major ingredient of our revolutions. But of course, I think big revolutions that involve changing how the state is organized. I think that has oftentimes requires some coherent ideology, and that's what happened during the French Revolution. All the major revolutions, including the Iranian Revolution, right? So, which is slightly distinct from the kind of populist upsurge now, which is a challenge to status quo, but not to the degree, I guess, as a full-blown kind of attempt to change the basic state structure, I guess. Yeah. Thank you.
All right, we're now in the Q&A session. Thank you, Professor Xu.